Recently, I had to go into the archives of our parish. So as you might know, St. Peter's Parish has been around since 1860, which in some places in the world, of course, is relatively new for a Catholic church. But for the Archdiocese of Vancouver, this is quite old. In fact, St. Peter's is the first parish that was established in Vancouver. So we do have quite an archive, and whenever I get into there, I start getting lost and interested in the different pictures, the images, the notes, sort of the old pamphlets and flyers that were made. And to see this span of, well over 100 years now, of course, this span of people who have worshipped here at St. Peter's Parish, it really makes you think, what in the end is God wanting us here for? Why does our parish community exist since 1860? Why is it that we are here? And of course, this is a complicated question, and it's a hot evening, so I don't want to get too much into it. But the gospel certainly gives us some indications of why we exist as a church. And of course, we're not talking here just a church building, but a church, people, who we are. Why do we exist? What are we here for? And Jesus in the gospel makes it clear that we are sent out on a mission. We exist as Christians to have some sort of mission in this world. Of course, we come to church to be strengthened as a community, to heal, to grow together, but ultimately the goal is to be sent out on this mission. And we see in the gospel today that Jesus sends out his disciples. He sends them out 2 by 2, he sends them out with very little, and he sends them out on a specific mission. And the mission that we hear about in today's gospel, we could summarize as proclaiming the victory of God over the forces of evil and death. We see in the gospel that Jesus tells them to go out and heal. Jesus tells them to go out and exorcise demons. In other words, Jesus comes to tell them that God now is in charge. God is here to conquer all these negative influences. They are sent out in the end on a message of healing. There's many different ways that we could describe the church, various images. I love the image that Pope Francis has used since the start of his pontificate. Pope Francis described the church as a field hospital. And so if you've ever seen MASH, the TV show, you know what a field hospital is, where people are bandaged and wounded in the midst of sometimes chaos, real difficulties, struggles. A field hospital is usually in a tent. For this reason, they can go out and serve other people. Pope Francis reminds us that we, the church, are this field hospital. We, first and foremost, receive healing from Jesus Christ in his sacraments, being in community, praying together, but we are sent out to heal the wounds of those around us, to bring peace where there is division, to bring healing to situations of difficulty and discord. We as a church exist because we have a mission. It's quite important that Jesus sends out the disciples 2 by 2. This teaches us that we are not alone in this mission. We are meant to be in community. And in fact, we fulfill this mission better when we are in community. A story was told some time ago. There was an international meeting in the church, and people were coming from different places in the world, and they were talking about different methods for fulfilling God's mission in the world. What are different ways we can fulfill God's mission? And some people were saying, okay, we can do this through media or maybe better preaching. Different examples were given, all quite good examples. But eventually someone from a more remote place in the world in the church gave the following kind of instruction. She explained that in her community, in her Christian community, when they send out missionaries into a new place where they haven't yet heard the gospel, it's not so important for them to send books or to send some videos or to send some messages. Rather, they send into one of these villages, perhaps, where they haven't heard of Jesus. They send a Christian family. And I thought that this was such a great insight. They send a Christian family to live among them, that they can see the way that they love, share, forgive each other. And she explained that after that Christian family lives in that village for some time, many of the villagers decide or want to be Christian, are drawn to that message. We then in this mission are together. We are a community. And the example we set as a community will draw people closer to Jesus. We as Christ are sent out not necessarily 2 by 2, but as a community to fulfill this mission. Ultimately as well, Christ reminds us that we rely on God's power to do this mission. And this comes quite strongly in the detail where Christ sends them out with very little, just kind of the clothes on their back and a staff. This is an important reminder for them that the efficacy of their mission all depends on God. God is the one who, in the end, changes people's hearts. We need to remind ourselves of this as well. We need to, of course, work as hard as we can, but we need to remember that God, in the end, is in charge. And that's summarized, you probably heard that expression, work like everything depends on you and pray like everything depends on God. The gospel reminds us that on this mission, God is the one in charge. Of course, there's been different saints throughout history who have taken Jesus' instructions literally to have very few possessions on this mission. And of course, someone who comes to mind is St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi started this incredible community that was very much focused on reliance of God and also poverty. St. Francis in his own life had this charism to live a very simple, a very humble life. And if you've ever had the chance to go to Assisi, in the Basilica of St. Clare there in the city of Assisi, there's kind of like a display where you see different objects associated with St. Francis. And one of them is the actual tunic that he wore. And this tunic is so beaten up, there's basically patches upon patches upon patches. And St. Francis lived this dependence on God in such a remarkable way. He knew that he had to work as hard as he could in this mission, but in the end, all relied on Christ. We too are reminded of this in the gospel. Each and every Mass, we of course have this opportunity to remind ourselves of the mission we are sent out on by Christ. At the end of Mass, we have the dismissal that says, "The Mass is ended, go in peace," or different endings like this. And this isn't just kind of an end to the Mass so we can wrap up, but it's a true reminder to us that when we receive the Eucharist, when we receive Christ, we are sent out into the world on this mission. Let us then be strengthened once again in this Eucharist to remind ourselves that Christ has called us to be a church, to be a community, to heal us and to bless us. But in the end, Christ has sent us on a mission to bring this healing message to those around us.